New York Rangers have traded Kaapo Kakko to the Seattle Kraken for defenseman Will Borgen and a 3rd and 6th round pick in the 2025 NHL draft. This comes a day after the 2019 second overall pick was very outspoken about being a healthy scratch Sunday. Kakko, 14 points in 30 games this season.
Right on.
Here's our friend Pierre LeBrun, our hockey analyst, to talk about a number of things, including, Pierre, this Kakko trade that I think we all saw coming, but boy, did it happen fast. Scratched on Sunday, outspoken about it afterward. 3 days later, he's off to Seattle. What was your reaction to the trade, and who do you think might be next?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jay, we're not surprised, but not so much because of how outspoken he was at being scratched. I mean, that's the obvious reaction. The reality is, let's give some credit here to my good friend Darren Dreger, who was the first insider a number of weeks ago on Insider Trading to say, this guy's on the market again, Kaapo Kakko, and he might get traded. And at the time, I think that caught some people by surprise because the focus was so much on Trouba and on Kreider and the memo that Chris Drury had sent out. And of course, Trouba was traded. But the reality is the Rangers have been talking to teams on Kakko for quite a while, way before he got scratched on the weekend and way before he had his comments about feeling like he got singled out unfairly. So this wasn't a reactionary trade, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It's been weeks in the making. And listen, there were a number of teams that wanted to get their hands on Kakko, who's been disappointing since, for the most part, in terms of not finding consistency in his game, given his pedigree since he's been a Ranger. But a lot of teams really wanted the chance to get the 2.0 version and hope that a reset and a refresh could be good for him with them. That's why Seattle has been on him for a while. And I know from exchanging messages with the Kraken tonight, like, they're pretty excited. They think that he can find his game in Seattle. They certainly hope he can. And if they do, the ceiling play on this trade is for Seattle, not as much for the Rangers. They got a good defenseman in Will Borgen, of course, and it's hard to trade for a defenseman, and they needed a defenseman after trading Trouba. But the reality is the ceiling play here is definitely for Ron Francis and the Seattle Kraken. But one of the things that I heard from one of the teams who also wanted to get in on Kakko is that they didn't have a defenseman to trade the Rangers. The Rangers had made it clear, the teams calling on Kakko, we need a D-back, and Seattle was able to step up there.
Do you see the possibility of Chris Drury turning around right away and making another deal? He's traded Trouba, as you mentioned. Kakko comes next. We know Chris Kreider's name was out there. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the trade freeze comes, Thursday night at midnight, so I don't know if he's got another one in him right now, but certainly between now and March 7th, yeah, I don't think he's done. I mean, the Rangers have been really the biggest disappointment of the season in the NHL in many ways. I guess you could argue Nashville. But unlike Nashville, the Rangers were 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup final 6 months ago. And to see their fall from that position to this is unreal. And, ever since that news leaked of Chris Drury messaging all the other GMs and saying Kreider and Trouba were available, the Rangers are 3-9-0. So if part of the reasoning from MSG was to have, that leak obviously filter through the media, was to sort of shake up the team and wake them up, it did not work. It went the other way for the New York Rangers. And it's a team in disarray right now, a team that's not on the same page. It feels like for those players that it's not enjoyable to come to work every day. So, again, we'll see where this goes. But no, I don't think Chris Drury's done.
You mentioned the Rangers disappointing, Nashville disappointing. You could make a pretty strong argument that Buffalo might be the most disappointing team, right? I mean, winless in 10 going into Monday. Their owner, Terry Pegula, flies to Montreal to meet with the team, says the solution's in this room, and then they promptly lose to the Montreal Canadiens a day later to make it 11 winless. Where do they go from here, Pierre? Where do they go?
Every other owner, by the way, every other NHL owner, after seeing the 6-1 loss right after Terry Pegula met the Sabres, made a mental note. Okay, I'm never addressing our team in person. I'm never doing that. I mean, it is unbelievable that would be the way they would react after the owner, does a very rare thing of meeting the players directly. You don't see that a lot in the NHL. There's so many layers to this, Jay, and obviously we don't have all night to talk about this, but this would be their 14th consecutive year out of the playoffs. It's almost impossible to even think that in a league with so much parity. Like, at some point, the bounce has to go your way. And, I thought a lot about this. I mean, listen, in the short term, what we know from talking to other teams is Kevin Adams, the GM, is absolutely listening on almost anyone. I mean, he's not, I don't think he's going to make a panic move, but if you go to him with an apples to apples, big piece for a big piece, the Sabres are listening on that from here to March 7th. But if you peel the onion back a bit more and look at this 13, 14-year, nightmare for the Sabres, a never-ending rebuild, the one thing that I come back to, and again, it's not to pick on these guys, but Terry Pegula, since buying the team in 2011, has hired 3 GMs. Tim Murray, Jason Botterill, and Kevin Adams. And all 3 have one thing in common. They were first-time NHL GMs. Which doesn't mean you can't do a good job as a first-time GM. No one's complaining about Bill Zito in Florida. No one's complaining about Kelly McCrimmon in Vegas. But, you still took a pretty big chance 3 times in a row with someone who had not been a GM before. And, I hate to draw this parallel because maybe it's a sloppy one, but the Edmonton Oilers, remember, they were the team we used to put with Buffalo as, when are they going to come out of this? When are they going to come out of the culture change and the rebuild? I tell you what, the hiring of Ken Holland 5.5 years ago was a pretty big moment. Not as big maybe as winning the lottery and drafting Connor McDavid and drafting Leon Draisaitl the year before. But if you look at where the Oilers were before Ken Holland arrived and where they were after losing Game 7 of the Cup final when he left last summer, there is something to having experience to getting a team like this out of this funk. And I'm not saying Kevin Adams shouldn't be GM, but why haven't they brought in more experience to help him? Why isn't there a president of hockey like Vancouver has Jim Rutherford helping Patrick Alvin, who's a first-time GM? Doug Wilson is advising Kyle Dubas in Pittsburgh. There's lots of examples where a mentor of sorts can help a young GM. And I think that's done a disservice in many ways to Kevin Adams, regardless of how you feel about him as a GM.
Let's talk about Tuesday's insider trading. You said the Canucks are looking for a top 4 defenseman. And last week on the show, you had just chatted with Oilers president Jeff Jackson. Jeff Jackson mentioned they might be looking for a top 4 defenseman. Pierre, are we about to see 2 Pacific Division arch rivals duke it out over who gets the best top 4 defenseman?
Yeah, I mean, they're both going to try to add on the blue line, Jay. That is correct. What I would say is I'm feeling more urgency from the Canucks. My sense from talking to teams around the league is that Vancouver's poking around and looking at top 4D options. Obviously, the injury to Filip Hronek has really been impactful. And so I think there's a little more urgency on the part of the Canucks. And second of all, Jim Rutherford, Patrick Alvin, the Rutherford-esque tradition has been continued by Alvin, who last year, in January traded for Elias Lindholm.
Yes.
They don't need to wait till the trade deadline. We know that from Jim Rutherford. Whereas I think the Oilers, listen, I do think they end up adding to their blue line before March 7th, but I don't feel the same level of urgency in the sense that I think that they feel their defense, which was much maligned in preseason because of the losses, has actually been better than what people anticipated. So I don't think they feel, they're in a situation where it has to happen now, but all things being equal, yes, that is where the Oilers are determined to add before March 7th as well.
Pierre, I got to say, this is the last time I get to chat with you before the end of 2024. We won't, in fact, chat until a few days after the NFL regular season wraps up. So I must get a prediction from you, my friend. Will Mike McCarthy be head coach of the Dallas Cowboys the next time I get to chat with you on this show?
By the way, I forgot to wear my Dallas Cowboys holiday sweater, so that was bad of me. I wore it last year, as you may remember.
It was great.
Yeah, I think he will be. I generally think that the players there like Mike McCarthy. And what that is an indictment of, the fact that the players in Dallas want Mike McCarthy back despite his contract expiring, I think it's an indictment of, frankly, who's running the team as opposed to who's coaching the team. I'll leave it at that.
That's a fair statement, I'd say. Great to have you on the show, Pierre, as always. We've really enjoyed this new segment, and hope you travel safe over the holidays, and we'll talk to you in 2025, okay?
Right on, Jay. Thanks, pal.
And I'll say this. I know Pierre is excited what we have coming up after the break. Everyone loves Mark Masters. He's coming up from World Junior.